The year is 1347. Across the European continent, merchants haggle in crowded marketplaces, their voices rising above the clatter of wagon wheels on cobblestone. Cathedral bells mark the hours in cities swelling with ambition, their Gothic spires climbing toward heaven as if reaching for something permanent, something eternal. In the countryside, farmers tend fields that have known 3 generations of plenty. The harvests have been good. The barns are full. Ships laden with silk and spices navigate familiar trade routes, their captains knowing every harbor from Constantinople to London, every current, every seasonal wind. In monasteries tucked into green valleys, scribes preserve knowledge on vellum, their quills scratching out philosophy and theology with the patient confidence of men who believe their civilization will endure forever. The air hums with normalcy, with routine, with the comforting weight of order. No one notices the ships arriving in Sicilian ports, their sails dark against the autumn sky. No one yet understands that the world they know is already gone. To understand what was destroyed, we must first understand what was built. By the mid-14th century, Europe had achieved something remarkable. Something that would have seemed impossible to the warlords and scattered kingdoms that emerged from Rome's collapse. A continent-spanning network of trade, faith, and culture had woven itself across thousands of miles, connecting fishing villages in Norway to banking houses in Florence, while merchants in England to dye makers in Flanders. Gothic cathedrals rose in cities growing faster than at any time since the Caesars walked the earth. Notre Dame in Paris, the Duomo in Siena, Cologne's twin-spired cathedral, its construction spanning generations, each stone laid with the assumption that children not yet born would see it completed. These were not mere buildings. They were promises made in stone and glass. Universities in Paris, Oxford, and Bologna produced scholars who debated Aristotle and mapped the stars, who reconciled ancient philosophy with Christian theology, who believed human reason could unlock the mysteries of creation itself. Knowledge was being preserved, expanded, transmitted across borders and languages. The Hanseatic League connected Baltic timber merchants to Mediterranean wine traders in a web of commerce that seemed unbreakable. Contracts were honored, debts were paid. Ships departed on schedule and returned with exotic goods that had traveled impossible distances. Pepper from India, porcelain from China, ideas and innovations flowing along the same routes as gold and grain. Agricultural innovations had ended centuries of hunger. The 3-field system allowed land to rest and regenerate. Heavy plows turned soil that had never been cultivated. Mills harnessed the power of rivers and wind. Population surged. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Markets expanded to meet demand, and demand created new markets. This was not merely survival. This was civilization ascending, confident in its trajectory, building monuments meant to last 1,000 years. But the same roads that carried prosperity would carry something else. The Silk Road stretched from Chinese ports through Central Asian steppes to the shores of the Black Sea, a river of goods flowing endlessly westward. For centuries, it had brought wealth. Venetian and Genoese merchants controlled the terminal points, their ships shuttling between Crimean warehouses and Mediterranean harbors in rhythmic, predictable cycles. Every spring, the convoys departed. Every autumn, they returned. The system was mechanical, reliable, profitable. Cities had transformed to accommodate this new abundance. Florence, Paris, London settlements designed for 10,000 now held 50,000. Bodies pressed together in narrow streets where sunlight barely reached the cobblestones. Families lived stacked in timber buildings that leaned against each other like drunks, their upper floors nearly touching across alleyways so narrow a man could touch both walls with outstretched arms. Waste flowed through open channels. The air smelled of smoke and bodies and animals. Density was wealth. Density was civilization. Pilgrims walked ancient routes to Santiago de Compostela, to Rome, to Canterbury, spreading their faith and their coins, sleeping in crowded inns and monasteries, sharing bread and prayers and breath. The faithful believed these journeys brought them closer to God, that the hardship purified the soul. They were also preparing the pathways for something else. The medieval world had become interconnected in ways no previous civilization had achieved. A letter written in Bruges could reach Venice in weeks. A merchant could arrange credit in one city and collect payment in another. Laws and customs harmonized across borders. Latin united scholars. The Church united souls. It was a triumph of human organization. It was also a trap already sprung. October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships dock at Messina in Sicily. The harbor master walks the pier to inspect the cargo, routine paperwork in hand. What he finds is not routine. The crew is dying. Some are already dead. Their bodies sprawled on deck beneath Mediterranean sun. Boils the size of apples erupt from their necks, their armpits, their groins. Black bruises spread across skin like spilled ink, like continents forming on a map of flesh. The men who can still speak beg for water, for priests, for mercy. The harbor master orders the ships away immediately, back to the open sea, away from the city. But it's already too late. Within days, Messina's streets fill with the sick. The symptoms are uniform, horrifying, fever and chills. The buboes, those dark swellings, appear suddenly, painfully. Then the coughing starts, blood-tinged sputum, lungs filling with fluid. Death comes in 3 days, sometimes 4, rarely longer. Within weeks, the dead outnumber those who can bury them. The plague moves with the logic of commerce and the speed of rumor. From Sicily to the Italian mainland, Naples, Rome, Genoa, where some of those 12 ships originated, becomes a charnel house. The disease follows the trade routes with mechanical precision, spreading up the Rhone Valley into France, across the Alps into the German principalities, along the coast to Barcelona and Valencia. Marseille falls. Avignon, seat of the papal court, falls. Paris, the jewel of Christendom, falls. Physicians bleed patients, believing corrupt blood must be drained. They consult astrological charts, searching for celestial explanations, some malign conjunction of Saturn and Mars, perhaps. They burn aromatic herbs and recommend fleeing the miasmas, the bad air that surely carries the contagion. Priests offer prayers and last rites, anointing the dying with holy oil, whispering absolution into ears that may no longer hear. Nothing slows it. The whispers become screams. When death arrives at such scale, at such speed, the frameworks that hold society together simply dissolve. Fathers abandon children at the first sign of fever. Mothers leave infants in empty houses and flee to the countryside. Physicians refuse to see patients. Priests flee their parishes rather than administer last rites to the dying, unwilling to breathe the same air, to touch the same skin. The sacred duty of the Church, care for the sick, comfort for the dying, evaporates in the face of terror. City councils cease to function as officials die or disappear into the countryside. Laws go unenforced, markets close. The intricate machinery of medieval commerce, the contracts, the credit, the trust, stops working when the people who made it work are dead or running. The dead accumulate faster than the living can manage. Bodies lie in streets for days, bloating in the sun, torn at by dogs and rats. Mass graves are dug in churchyards, then in fields beyond the city walls. They fill. New pits are opened. They fill. The pits become trenches. The trenches become fields of the dead, layered without ceremony or prayer, lime scattered over flesh to slow the stench and the rot. In Florence, Giovanni Boccaccio watches his city transform into a necropolis. He will later write of carts rolling through streets at dawn, drivers calling for the dead the way merchants once called for customers. He describes families eating dinner together in the evening, all dead by morning. He describes the sound of the city changing, The bells that once marked canonical hours now toll constantly, endlessly, until the bell ringers themselves die and the bells fall silent. In Avignon, the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, God's representative on earth, cannot stop the dying. The bodies pile so high that the Rhone River itself is consecrated as holy ground so corpses can be dumped into its waters. The current carries them downstream, past villages and vineyards, a floating reminder that God's protection has been withdrawn. The plague exposes a terrible truth. Civilization is not a monument but a performance, and it requires living actors. The laws, the markets, the hierarchies, the faith, all of it depends on people showing up, fulfilling roles, maintaining the illusion of permanence. When enough performers exit the stage, the play simply ends. By 1353, the plague's first wave had burned through Europe like a fire through dry timber. 1/3 to 1/2 of the population was gone, perhaps more. Exact numbers would never be known. Entire villages stood empty, their fields returning to wilderness. Cathedral construction stopped mid-building, scaffolding standing abandoned against unfinished walls. Ships rotted in harbors because there weren't enough sailors to crew them. The survivors inherited a transformed world. Labor became scarce and therefore valuable. For the first time in memory, peasants could demand wages. They could negotiate. They could leave the land that had bound their grandparents and great-grandparents. Serfs walked away from manors and found employment in the next village, the next town, wherever the pay was better. Lords offered incentives, reduced rents, freedom from labor obligations, desperate to keep workers who suddenly had choices. The feudal order, already weakening before the plague, accelerated its collapse. In England, laws were passed trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, trying to force laborers back into the old hierarchies. The laws failed. Within a generation, the peasants' revolt would erupt, with rebels marching on London demanding an end to serfdom entirely. The church, unable to stop the plague or explain it, faced a crisis of authority it would never fully recover from. If prayer couldn't save you, if sacraments offered no protection, if priests died like everyone else, then what was the point? Heretical movements that had simmered quietly before the plague now boiled over. Questions that had been whispered were shouted. The Reformation would not arrive for another century and a half, but the plague made it inevitable. Art grew darker, more death-obsessed. Danse macabre murals appeared on church walls, skeletons dancing with kings and peasants alike, with bishops and beggars, all equal in the grave. Death the leveler, death the truth-teller. The plague had revealed that all the hierarchies of medieval society, all the claims of blood and breeding, meant nothing when the buboes appeared. Yet the plague also created opportunity. Social mobility increased. A peasant's son could become a merchant now, simply by surviving and seizing the chance. Real wages rose dramatically as labor remained scarce. The survivors, traumatized but liberated from certain ancient constraints, began building something new from the ruins of what had been. The universities reopened. The cathedrals, those that could find the money and the masons, resumed construction. Trade routes repopulate. But the world they served was different, harder, less innocent, more aware of its own fragility. The Black Death did not end medieval Europe. Nothing so simple. It transformed Europe into something else, something that would become the Renaissance, the Reformation, the modern world. The plague created vacuums that new ideas rushed to fill. It destabilized hierarchies that had seemed eternal. It forced questions about divine justice, human agency, the nature of authority itself. The catastrophe revealed vulnerabilities in systems that seemed permanent and strengths in people who seemed powerless. It demonstrated that catastrophe and progress are not opposites but dance partners, each leading in turn, each shaping the other. We look back across 7 centuries at a world that thought itself stable, sophisticated, ascending. We see the Gothic cathedrals rising and the trade networks expanding and the population surging, and we see a civilization that believed it had solved the fundamental problems of human organization. And we see ourselves. We see our own interconnected systems, more complex than anything the medieval world could have imagined, but built on the same assumption of continuity. We see our own invisible threads of trade and travel, our supply chains spanning oceans, our cities pressing millions of bodies together. We see our own confidence that what we've built cannot fall, that the monuments we've erected, not in stone but in infrastructure and institutions and interconnected dependencies, will endure. The medieval world teaches us this. Civilizations are fragile. The systems that enable prosperity can become the vectors of collapse. The same density that creates culture creates vulnerability. The same networks that spread ideas spread contagion. But humans are resilient. They rebuild. They adapt. They survive not by clinging to what was but by creating what must come next. The world that emerged from the Black Death was not worse than what preceded it. It was different, transformed, carrying forward both scars and possibilities no one in 1347 could have imagined. The plague ended the medieval world, but the people who survived it built the modern one. That is both warning and comfort as we face our own fragilities, our own invisible threads, our own assumptions of permanence in a world that promises nothing but change.